Hi, I'm Dr. Feyinfolu Balogun, also known as Folu for short.
Hi, I'm Dr. Onyinye Balogun. We are the Ankh Docs.
Thank you for tuning in to our episode today.
Welcome to the Ankh Docs podcast. We are so excited to be speaking today with the Dr. Melissa Davis. That's how I introduce you, the Dr. Melissa Davis. So, Melissa, it's wonderful to have you on the show. Thank you for agreeing to come on and just to chat with us.
Thank you for having me. I feel very honored to be among the people who you've chosen for your podcast, and thank you for doing this.
It's our pleasure. So, basically, what we focus on in this podcast is we realize that Black individuals are disproportionately affected by cancer. But when you look at the media, at the representations of cancer, whether in stories that are being told, or even like the landscape of who are people who are giving advice, you don't often see that many Black individuals. So we saw this discrepancy and wanted to step into the gap. And that's why we think it's just so important to have people like you who are at the forefront of cancer research and breakthroughs come to talk to us. So why don't we just start off with tell us who you are and what you do?
Okay. I am Melissa B. Davis. There are a lot of Melissa Davises out there, so I have to use my B, my middle name. But
that's true.
Yeah. I am the founding director of the Institute for Translational Genomic Medicine at Morehouse School of Medicine. Just moved there, been there a little bit over a year. At Morehouse School of Medicine, I'm also a professor for biochemistry, immunology, and molecular biology. I have a lab where we study using genomics and other multi-omics techniques, some wet bench work, we call it, where we even use cell lines and models to study specifically the biological differences in tumors across populations. We study this in the context of genetic ancestry, trying to further our understanding of how the genetic background of different individuals plays a role in disease course. And I'm also, along with you, Onye, an affiliate professor or faculty at the Genome Center, the New York Genome Center, where our role there is as cancer ethnicity scholars with the Polyethnic 1000 Project. And I'm also a Georgia Research Alliance Distinguished Investigator, which is in and of itself quite an honor. It's an endowment to my faculty position. So
I know it doesn't cover most of them. There's so many other accolades that we could go on and on, but we won't. We'll let people, get familiar with you. We'll post your information on the website and on our socials, because you really are quite an accomplished and humble individual. And again, having that inaugural position with the Georgia Research Alliance is so amazing. I remember when that opportunity came up, and it was a no-brainer, it seemed.
I know it's a historic opportunity. I mean, one of the, aspects of stepping away from Weill Cornell, of course, was the fact that I have this strong ties with the institution. I have, partnerships there, scientific director of the International Center for the Study of Breast Cancer Subtypes. But, when you have a higher calling and you feel like a lot of the doors that opened for me did not open because of my talent. They did not open because of my, courage or savvy or strategy. It was a blessing. I felt the calling. I was like, there's probably nobody else that I know who could do what they're asking me to do, where they're trying to do it. I think I have to do it. I have to go.
In one thing that from your introduction and telling us more about yourself and know what you do, one thing that always stands out or sticks out to me is the genetics and genomics. How did you get interested in that field of research? What pulled you there? And I'm biased because I love that field too, and I appreciate it. And it's always an honor to see and read about what you're doing.
Yeah, so I have two answers to that question. It depends on who I'm talking to, actually. But since I'm talking to y'all, I'll tell you the real story. So
That's the real story.
My interest in genetics started as I was about to start graduate school. One of my assignments after I left this summer research opportunity at Ohio State University, the Ohio State University, it opened my eyes, first of all, to research. And then I had to decide what field I wanted to be involved in. At the time, there was no genomics at the time, there was genetics, right? There was this sort of burst in the field to try and assimilate how genetic alleles, if you will, versions of genes, right? How they influence human behavior. And so I actually had to do a report on a paper where the authors mentioned they had identified this gene that was responsible for criminal behavior. And in the paper, they said that there was a certain part of the population, that had a prevalence of this particular gene variant. And I was like, no.
It's getting very suspect.
Yeah, I said, I'm thinking, how do they attribute what is criminal behavior? First of all, what is criminal behavior? I mean, how do you define that? Let's define all the terms. And maybe it's a aggressive gene. Maybe it's someone who's aggressive, someone who's ambitious, but in a certain environment, when you can't thrive, that will present itself in a different way, right? Like your environment certainly has an impact on how you live and what you do.
Absolutely.
And there was no mention of that. There was no mention of what might drive someone down a certain path of behavior. And I thought it was very odd, and I couldn't really argue against it because I didn't understand the study. I didn't even know really what gene variants were. And so at that point, I just took up the responsibility of understanding more about genetics, and especially in a human setting, and, really just trying to understand how the study was done so that I could redo it. Y'all didn't do this right. So let me figure out how to do it and then show you what really should be done, right? Now, of course, I'm not in human behavior research, but I think it does come full circle for me in that, now we start studying social determinants of health and health disparities, That's how I got into it. Now, that's not the story I tell a lot of people, but
why don't you tell the real story? I mean, what's the fake story? I have to ask now.
Well, the professional story is that I wanted to be a part of cutting edge technology, right? It was a hot field at the time, and I felt like genomic and genetic medicine was going to pave the way for the future. But it didn't compel me. I mean, it was almost, and I think that might be true of my personality. Like, what compels me is more a sense of protection, advocacy than accolades.
Exactly. And to me, it's just striking how it doesn't change. People keep trying to use pseudo-scientific methods or even scientific methods, but in a twisted way to place certain identities on people. So, for instance, right, phrenology, we had smaller brains, so we weren't as intelligent. Or what you said, we now study, genetics, and there are these genes showing that the unspoken thing is that Black people are more likely to be criminal, right?
They said it overtly, even in the paper.
Oh, okay. You said it much nicer than they said it.
It was in the Black community,
Wow.
And, yeah. And then, where does that lead you when you start using science to define people? That leads you down a road of screening, right?
Yeah.
Right. That
exactly.
prediction of behavior. Come on.
Yeah. And then, the thing that gets me is that using true scientific methods, when they get these results, there isn't this introspection. There doesn't seem to be this, hey, what harm can be done by me talking about this? Or even report it, but to say, hey, we should be careful to not label everyone. So I really applaud you for kind of taking up the call or placing the call upon yourself to say, hey, I'm going to get into this area and make sure that these scientific methods are used properly and applied appropriately. That's why I call you the Melissa Davis, right?
It's very often the case that when there's a personal drive or a calling to do something, the passion with which you do it is different. That's why we all like the true story in terms of how you got drawn into it. Yes, it's a nice and sexy field. It's advancement in technology that applies to everybody. But what applies to the Dr. Melissa B. was different. So thanks for sharing that story.
Yeah.
I know. I think what I'd really love to hear from you is about how your current research focus evolved. Take us through the journey of here you are, you've graduated from Albany State, and then, you're doing your PhD at University of Georgia. Take us through how that evolved, your specific research focus.
Yeah, I have two stories for that too, but okay.
You're a woman of multiple stories.
Yeah, I mean, it's a perspective, and it's what I think people may appreciate or not appreciate. I think that, like, when I decided to look into the field of genetics, I had to go the route of training, right? So, being trained as a geneticist doesn't necessarily equate with doing human experiments because you can't really manipulate genes in humans. So, I had a PhD in molecular genetics from University of Georgia where I studied model organisms, right? So I was studying Drosophila. And I had this really cool project where I was cloning a gene that was responsible for hormone signaling. It was a receptor, probably the only steroid receptor that was known, at least in Drosophila at the time. And I mean, this field was pretty huge. It was a, very tight knit community. And, I fully felt emerged and immersed in that community. And I had this really cool project, like I said, and I had finally made some groundbreaking discoveries about isoforms of steroid receptors. And anyway, I show up to the annual meeting to give a talk, which was unheard of for a graduate student.
Not for the Melissa Davis.
Oh, come on now. Anyway. So as I was walking into this huge meeting, there was a team there that was part of Craig Venter's company, and they had basically sequenced the entire Drosophila genome and was handing it out to everybody.
Wow.
And there, lo and behold, I put the little disc in my computer, and there was my gene, fully mutated. I mean, I felt mixed feelings at the time because it had vindicated me because I was having this argument with my PI at the time that there was isoforms. Like, there are 3 isoforms here. And he was like, no, you did the experiment wrong. And I was like, why do I have to be wrong? Why can't it just be new knowledge that nobody else, knew? And then when I saw what I saw, I was like, there it is. There's the 3rd isoform. And he was like, well, yeah, that's great. But now what are you going to do for your dissertation? Because this has already been figured out. And you have to, by definition, do something that no one else has done in order to graduate. So I was like, okay. I see your point, and I don't know. So I decided to follow the beast that had slayed me, which was genomics at the time. And I switched my project over to actually looking at the downstream, like, okay, well, now we know what the gene is. Let's look at what it does. So I decided to switch my project to studying how the receptor was regulating transcription, right? And in order to do that, I had to leave Georgia. I had to leave the University of Georgia because, again, this was a new field. Only like 2 labs in the country even had the technology at the time. And so I went to the one that was at Yale. I just happened to meet this guy at a meeting. I literally just walked up to him and I was like, so listen, I need to graduate, and can I come to your lab and do some microarray experiments? And he was like, okay. That was Kevin White, and I joined his lab at Yale, and I graduated because he had to explain to my committee the work that I did because they didn't really catch it. And then ended up doing my postdoc with him, and he moved to University of Chicago. And that's where I met Fumio Lopate, and I was working her in her breast cancer project, and that's where I learned about disparities in breast cancer. But more than that, as I was looking at their data and helping her team, with these analyses, I was seeing these trends where it seemed like there were differences in some of the receptors, hormone receptors, between the Nigerian patients that she had, the African Americans, and the white patients that she had. So that sparked this sort of idea in my mind that maybe there's something trending with genetic ancestry here that has not really been tapped into, right? So that launched my career.
Was it Nigerian patients in Chicago and then American patients and white patients all in Chicago?
No, these were Nigerian patients from Nigeria.
I see.
And I mean, she had some African patients who were in Chicago, but I can't really remember if there was a significant number of those. I do remember, Nigerian versus Black versus white. So, and at the time, she and Sarah Gellert were the co-directors of the Center for Interdisciplinary Health Disparities, and they were working on breast cancer. And so, Sarah Gellert's work is in social behavioral, background, and they were basically trying to unravel why they were seeing some of the same trends that the country saw, which was worse outcomes in Black patients. And they attributed some of their hypotheses to the environment where Black women in the South Side of Chicago versus women who live in the North Side may have experiences, right, that are akin to access and quality of health, but more than that, they were all being seen with the standard of care, same standard of care, but still had this disparity. And for me, that drove it home even more. Like, well, if they're all getting the same treatment, right? And if we make the assumption that it's equitable because they're all seeing the same doctors, and we can't really believe that at a population level, the same doctors are, mishandling patients because of this dichotomy, then there must be something else that's driving the outcome here. And then when I saw with my own eyes that this factor was literally in a different compartment of the cell, right? It was as different as night and day. Like in one population, it's in the cytoplasm, and the other population, it's in the nucleus. It's like, there's something weird here.
What factor was it?
CARM1. It's actually a cofactor for estrogen receptor.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yes. And at the time, I started trying to study that gene, but I dropped it eventually because there are too many people trying to work on it. So I was like, I'm gonna find something else to do. But yeah, so that's how I ended up looking at disparities. And I guess some of the other things I noticed in the cohort too was that the Black patients seemed to be younger. And what I know about molecular genetics and heritability is any disease that has a heritable context to it tends to be earlier onset. So why are the Black women so much younger than the white women, when they get this really aggressive kind of cancer that's not responding to therapy? I think this is a different kind of tumor, and I think there's a genetic basis. Now, at the time, I got laughed out of the room, right? Like, it doesn't matter if you're Black or white. Why would it matter at a biological level? This has to do with environment and equity. At best, maybe stress is a factor, but not genetics. Right? Yeah. So I said, well, I think there's more to this. And then I set out on my journey, which was not easy. It was not easy. I had to find some people who shared my hypothesis, and that was hard to find. Could not find it at a majority white institution. Where I found it was at historically Black colleges, right? Where they exist to serve the Black community. So they pay closer attention to what's happening in the Black community. And they have all kind of interventions for healthcare access that still don't necessarily result in better outcomes. So that led them to also wonder, well, what are the differences here? Why is prostate cancer happening at such a higher rate and at younger ages, right? So that was actually the first paper I published with the genomic slant to disparities, was a prostate cancer paper with Renee Reams is one of the first comparative studies done.
That's amazing.
Indeed, it is. When you're talking about this, even just with the biology of how you're finding the receptor in different parts of the cell for different people, how deep it goes into biology. And just with the studies and the work, you still tell us more about how it can almost align. Looking for the right word, but I'm using the word align with the disparities in outcomes for different diseases, for cancers.
Yeah.
How do you think about biology versus the social determinants of health? And also importantly, the intersection between them, whereby biology cannot just be it. Like they work together in an interesting manner. And I say this because sometimes people can easily say, well, it's just biology, it's just different. They just have worse cancer outcomes. There's nothing we can do about it. What do you say to things to that based on your work?
Well, I mean, let's start by acknowledging first that cancer itself is influenced by a complex of genetics and environment, right? I don't care who you are, it's not just that you have a BRCA mutation, it's a BRCA mutation in the context of something, right?
Mm.
And so I don't negate that what one's lived experience might be. So that includes, right, the environment that they live in, their lifestyle, the built environment around them, what they could be exposed to, their lifestyle choices in terms of their habits, diet, smoking, all of those play a factor, and all of those are part of what you might consider nurture or the environment. And I think that influence is true even outside of the context of disparities. So, of course, then it would be a key factor in disparities because we see differences in the environment that also are dichotomized along the lines of race, unfortunately, right? The construct was designed specifically to create a hierarchy. No one's going to, conflate that. And unfortunately, the construct works. It works, even though it's wrong, it works. It actually marginalized the people who were supposed to be marginalized, and it left them with not the same, resources. But what we also know is that through human evolution, right, there are different genetic backgrounds that we see visibly, right? So skin color, hair texture, height, weight, in some instances that are driven by a genetic underpinning, right? That's a part of how we adapted to our environments, our ecosystems, more so than environments in that aspect. Even down to physiology, right? So how we process salts, how we respond to infectious diseases, all of those things are then a part of your genetic background, the heritability, what you inherit in your lineage. And so then why can't we, in this context, accept and study to understand how to intervene on the way my genetic background interplays with a certain environment, right? And so, yes, there could be predispositions that are exaggerated because of malnourishment or because of overexposure to pollutants, right? It's clear to me, and I don't understand why we have to debate it. I get the origins of, as we, spoke about before, sort of the abuse, right, of science, purposeful distortion of real, aligned with that construct, right? Trying to justify why the construct exists and needs to exist. But, let's throw that away. You know what I mean? Like, let's ignore that for the purposes of precision medicine. I think that we complain about not having access to equitable care, but the reality is what we would even get access to has not really been designed for literally the type of diseases that we are getting, and the we that I'm talking about is really broad. It's like non-white, right? It's like the opposite of discrimination. It's like when we know that the majority of the data that exists was only generated from a large majority of it was only from a single population, it shouldn't be a surprise then that these tools don't necessarily perform the same way in other populations. And that's true of just about everything that has an influence from genetics or even the environment, right? Because we have to consider all of those things. So in my research, like I'm a trained geneticist, genomicist, system biologist, whatever. And so I was focused on that, right? Like that's my skill set. That's what I'm an expert in. But then when I had to take a step back because I was under fire for even stepping out into the realm and saying there could be genetic differences across populations, like, no, I get a slap on my hand and we don't want race-based medicine. Okay, neither do I. But I don't want that either. That's not what I'm doing. What I do want, though, is for these genetic tests to come back with information that's actionable. And what I do want is for the drugs that are available to target something, that's driving the tumors in this population that they're dying from. I mean, when you see that the disease has a disparate burden, why wouldn't you study it in the population that has the heaviest burden? Why are you studying it in the population that tends to survive it? I think we need to flip the power structure, right? And be more intentional about really understanding the whole aspect of the disease. And that's really the foundation of what I want to do. I mean, it can't just be about the genetics, it can't just be about the environment. The cure to cancer is both of those things. It's not a single treatment, it is a change in your lifestyle as well. And if you don't have control over your lifestyle, then you don't have control over managing your risk.
And I think that you really eloquently put it in words. People who I think bristle or get concerned when people talk about genomics, genetics, I think they are concerned about, we're going to focus on this and say that the fault lies within and not talk about everything else. They don't want you to focus on genomics, genetics to the exclusion of everything else, which are very real factors like racism and environmental pollution and so many other things that can affect one's risk and the trajectory of one's cancer. So that's what I really love about the work that you do. Because yes, you're a trained molecular geneticist. Yes, you're a genomicist and systems biologist, but you have put together a phenomenal group of collaborators from multiple disciplines. And along those lines, I have to, first congratulate you on your recent historic win. This group that you put together of a really truly multidisciplinary team that I just briefly described has just won 25 million. I'll say it again, $25 million through the Cancer Grant Challenges. Why don't you talk a little bit about that and what you're doing through that and what it means to you?
So this opportunity, first of all, the fact that they even issued the challenge for cancer inequities, and you were part of that, process as well, where, the committee meets and decides, well, what are the challenges, the cancer community is facing? I got tired of always having to write the limitation section of the papers that we were writing, right? And that's at the heart of the Cancer Grant Challenge. They'll even say, they want to focus on the things that frustrate you as a scientist, right? The things that you cannot do because there's no mechanism that will fund it at the scale that you need to do it. And so you'll be battling this limitation your whole career, right? So this is an opportunity to take a leap forward. I think that some of the people on the team have never really even been cancer investigators, right? They've been studying some aspect of human biology or ecology and never even thought about, applying it to this question. And I selected those individuals because I think that that's what we need in order to take a leap forward. We have to think outside of the box that we've been forced to play in, right? Like this has been a really narrow field. It's been in silos, right? In almost like two parallel universes of social determinants and biological determinants. And then there's this clash that happens that I don't think benefits anybody. We have to collaborate, and we have to collaborate on being diverse, being a diverse team. So the team itself is diverse also by intention.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think that brings a lot of strength in our ability to problem solve, right? If you want to solve a complex problem, you have to be able to look at it from different angles, different vantage. And so having a diverse team also then means you have diverse thinkers. Like not everybody's going to think about it the same way.
Yeah.
And so as they get together in the same room and everybody's like, what? Oh, wow. Wow, I didn't know that. Are you serious? We have those kind of conversations all the time. And so
I love that.
I know, I do too. And I think even if we don't do everything that we're supposed to do, even just bringing these individuals who are leaders in their field and the enlightenment that they've already received just by trying to put the grant together, I mean, that's going to have ripple effects. It already has, right? Because now they go back to their labs and their trainees and they say, you'll never believe what I just learned. And then that sparks them. And then they think a certain way. And then they go into their classrooms and they challenge the way that their instructors are teaching something, some topic. And so there's this cascade, this ripple effect of awareness now. And I love that. And I think that is going to change a lot for disparities and inequity just because we came together. But what we plan to do is at a scale that's never been done. And every technology that we're using, we're tweaking for the purpose of this population, right? So the social determinants will not only capture what most social determinant study captures, which is education, income, the structural environment, the neighborhood deprivation. Sometimes now psychosocial health has finally, stepped into the spotlight. But at a population level, what does that look like? So we're going to even incorporate societal trauma, right? So how do you even begin to measure that? What does that look like, Melissa? Well, let's start with civil wars and, marginalizations and natural disasters that displace whole cities, whole ethnicities, right? That have to deal with the psychosocial trauma of just being who they are, where they are, right? So let's track that. So we'll be aligning our patients with what has been their lived experience across their lifetime. Like, did you have to deal with Hurricane Katrina? Did you have to deal with genocide? Let's talk about that and let's try to quantify something in the background. And it might not be specific to a certain, it might be, I don't know. We'll see. But it might not be specific to a specific event, like a certain epigenetic signature related to right. But we should be able to see that anyone who has suffered a shift in their culture, right, where they lost everything, right? How do you quantify that? And then they have cancer now. We should be able to see at a population level, what being in a society that hates you, how that can imprint. If we can quantify the harm that racism has, then I just feel like that's something that we have to focus on at a molecular level, because that's really what we're talking about, the translation of a lived experience down to the physiology of how your body is responding to that. We see that in the stress response. And so it's like, now, how does that translate to disease risk? When you're operating in an environment that's overrun with pollutants or you have a genetic predisposition and a DNA damage pathway. How does all of this sort of play a role at a population? Right. So, and then the exposures piece is also, not a new field, but it's a new application to cancer disparities, at least at this granularity. And so I think those are the two major aspects that I think are going to bring a huge amount of novel insight. We'll also be doing a lot in terms of genetics and genomics, creating new genome references. Hopefully will reset our ability to measure gene expression and gene mutations. But those two aspects of the environment and social determinants, I think, are going to be powerful.
I wanted to circle back to something we talked about early on. In your inaugural role with the Georgia Research Alliance, can you break it down for us what that would allow you to be able to do and how it may even tie in with this cancer grand challenges?
So the Georgia Research Alliance exists in the state of Georgia for the purpose of building better research infrastructure in the state. And also they have a sort of aspect of biotech, right? So they want to make sure that the research that's funded, that they fund, right, through the endowments somehow is translated to the community, right? Yeah. So I'm charged with that sort of by having the award, but I wouldn't have been chosen if they thought I could not bring something, to that space. So what that allows me to do is have the support of a very influential group of people from both sides of the political spectrum, actually, who feel a certain way, about disparities. But it allows me sort of the proximity to influence that I could have the opportunity to translate what we're doing directly into a paradigm or a product, right, that becomes a tool for the clinic, right? So I think that is also an aspect of disparities research that we don't always get an opportunity to translate what we've learned into anything other than a dissemination, right? We publish papers, we give talks, we raise awareness, and then what? Then the doctor says, and how does this change the way I treat my patients? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. But if I can create a tool for you, right, then it can change the way you treat your patients. If I can create an app, right, that will give you information that I can directly link to you and say, this patient who lives in this environment over here would benefit from immune checkpoint inhibitors. But also, if we don't address what's happening in that environment, they're going to recur. And they're going to be because you're curing the disease now because it's a disease because it passed the threshold, right? Whatever the impact was past the threshold. Now we have a tumor. So you're going to treat the tumor and then send them right back into the environment that caused the tumor. So if we don't address the whole patient, then we're not going to see an outcome. So what the Georgia Research Alliance will allow me to do is work with all of the GRA investigators and their cores across Georgia Tech, Emory, University of Georgia. So now I have access to an entire repertoire of technology across the state and their sort of biotechnology pathways that will allow me to, institute clinical trials that eventually should lead to tools, right, that we can use directly in the community.
Your constellation of awards and work essentially starts from asking the question out of nowhere. Like, what is it? What we're looking for, the problems, and goes through to the implementation, which is pretty much out of the scientific realm too.
Exactly.
And it's rare to see that in one place or in one person. So that's
that's why I said it's above me. It's me. It's like, okay, Lord.
So a comment and then a question. I think just what you're doing with the cancer research cancer grand challenges is there's so many firsts that you are putting forward. One, you are the first Black woman to lead a Cancer Grand Challenges team. 2, the first from a historically Black college or university to be leading, you know, that's amazing. And then some others that I was thinking of were 3. I don't know if you're the first one to have a patient advocate. Ricky Fairley, right? From Touch is part of your core team. I'm not sure that I've seen that before. And then the other one I'm thinking of is clearly like this work that you're doing that so elegantly integrates multiple aspects of cancer risk and things that can impact cancer. And I love that you're looking at it not just in the United States and the UK, where a lot of research is done in European and North American nations. I think, again, another first. You're the first to integrate African sites into a Cancer Grand Challenges project. So it'll be very interesting to see how does the stress that you were talking about that manifests as racism in one place or and then racism in one setting, perhaps it's genocide, right? Or a civil war in another. How are they similar? How are they different in their results on the body? So many first. Yeah. And then actually I realized we didn't really describe Project Standby. So in 2 sentences, I know it's difficult, but in 2 sentences, could you on like a 6th grade level explain what you're doing with Project Standby?
Sure. Well, first, SAMBI is an acronym for Societal Ancestry Molecular Biology Analysis of Inequities, right? So we're basically enumerating the multiple disciplines. So we're taking over 40,000 patients into the study across 3 continents, all from the same African diaspora, though. So that's the key here. We're focused on the African diaspora. There's an outgroup of Europeans who will serve as sort of our comparison of how social deprivation, even in a European background, might in itself cause, unique physiological because it has to be rigorous, right? We're going to be rigorous. So we will be studying how the social determinants correspond with the environmental exposures at a granular level, like the molecules in the patient's blood interacts with their genomic background. So we have a team that works on genomics, germline and tumor genomics. So that means we're studying what is inherited, sort of the normal state of the DNA, so to speak, compared to the cancer DNA and RNA. We'll also be developing human genome references that are more accurate for this population because some of the inaccuracies that we deal with in interpreting the output of genomics has to do with comparing apples and oranges, literally, right? So, let's compare Africans to African, browse. And then the last molecular biology team works more so of zooming even in further the cellular composition of the tumor. So really defining what the microenvironment is in the tumor. And we're focused on breast, prostate, and pancreatic cancer. And then, as you mentioned, Ricky Fairley is leading our last work package, which is patient, not engagement, but involvement. And they are leading our recruitment efforts. And they're also embedded in each team. And that is because, as you mentioned, the interpretation of, the results. Like what we don't want to happen is the genomicist to say, we found the genetic link to low education. Like, no, that's not what happened here.
Yeah.
So they're kind of keeping us grounded and in a space that makes sense for the lay public. But you're right. Like, honestly, I did not think about any of what you just said when I...
Really?
No, I did not. I mean, when people say it, I feel some kind of way because like, okay, I'm the first African American. It's the first HBCU. It's the first this. It's the first that. I didn't think about that at all when I was doing it. It was only until I saw it And I was like, oh, okay. That's interesting. But I'll tell you, we are breaking some of the tradition with the patient advocates. Like they have to reformulate their rules in order to incorporate Ricky the way that we did.
Beautiful.
Yeah, we're challenging them in a lot of different ways. And by them, I mean like the actual funding institutions and the structure that they have in place. But they've been trying to work with us because they do see the benefit. And I didn't realize that there was no one from Africa involved in any of the studies. And given that some of the teams actually work in Africa and they are focused on African populations, I didn't realize we were making the map bigger until I saw it at the announcement. It's like all the other UK and maybe some East Asian, right? But it was like this band across the globe. And then now there's Africa. So it's actually a truly global initiative. Yeah, so I'm kind of proud of that. And I hope that in my intention of including them at this level is so that they can receive something in return that is sustainable gift, right? Something that even after standby is over, they will have the capacity to carry on and do additional things, right? I think it's important that, and you know this firsthand, I think it's important that we first deal with the needs of the community as they see it. What are your concerns?
Yeah.
And then we can start talking about hypotheses and, scientific, work. So.
Yep. The phrase that comes to mind for both the aspect of involving a patient advocate and giving African researchers a prominent role on your team is nothing without us, right?
Absolutely.
I hear that a lot. And I think that the work you're doing really embodies that. What I'll finally say is, Olu knows one of my pet peeves is when people are in positions of influence and they choose to do nothing, or even worse, they oppress other individuals, especially those from minoritized communities. And it always just lifts me up to hear you talk about the work that you do. And I'm so proud of you. I'm proud to know the Dr. Melissa Davis. So.
Well, you also had a hand in my success, so thank you.
Well, pep talks, pep talks. I'm good for them.
Absolutely.
So the Melissa two-story B Davis, because you have two stories for most questions. Your journey has been interesting. Sometimes interesting journeys is not always good. It just means that there were challenges that we had to overcome, but you more than overcame them. We wanted to see what advice will you have for aspiring young scientists? What lessons have you learned that you
Yeah. The world will change again. And what do I mean by that? I mean, what I had to go through isn't what they're going through now. And what I went through isn't what the ones before me went through, John Carpenter, Rick Kittles, sort of our big brothers and big sisters, Shanita Hughes Halbert. Like I watched them deal with stuff that I didn't have to deal with. And so with each iteration, though, you have to have a spirit of persistence and find your people. And what do I mean by that? One of the best pieces of advice I got as a junior faculty came from this woman who was in the Department of Education. And I'll never forget her sitting in my office, which was like, used to be a closet or something, like it was little.
Oh my God.
And so I had like no privacy. And she was just talking so loud. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired. But, she was basically telling me not to let these people hold me back. She was like, don't isolate yourself in this one department, in this one institution. You're bigger than that. The world is a big place. Go outside of this institution. Go outside of your field if you have to, and find someone who you can collaborate and build with.
Yes.
That is the only way you're going to survive. And so as I look back at the progress that I've made, it always has been that I stepped outside of the lines that were drawn, connected with people who were not necessarily in my day-to-day space. So going to professional meetings, and I'm not great at networking. Like I have social anxiety. So, I have to make myself talk to people or even just be in the room, but I think those things have definitely been the key to how I've successfully, traversed the difficulties. And I would say you cannot do it alone. Like you're going to face, adversity just generally in academia, period. Like it's a game of chess. But so you need to find support in people who think like you and people who will check you, like keep you grounded and correct your thinking, right? None of us are perfect. So sometimes your theory is wrong and you have to be open to receive that. So that would be my second piece of advice is be open to learn. Like we do a lot of teaching, as we raise awareness, but be open to learn something in return because it is just your perspective. And so you have to be willing to understand the perspective of others as well.
Wise words, wise words. Thank you so much. We want to thank you for the time. You inspire me more than you know. I hear more about you than you realize we're moving and we're working together. I'm glad that with this opportunity also you get to share your story and inspire many more people. And we know how busy you are. We're speaking with the scientist at the biggest North American scientific conference. We stole you for a few minutes, and we appreciate that. As we're wrapping up, we wanted to see if there were anything you wanted to talk about. That we know we've asked you a lot of questions, but anything that's of interest to you, the floor is yours.
I don't know. I think we touched on everything. I guess the last thing I would say is when you're blessed and you have been given opportunities like what I have been given, I think it's important, that we always give back.
Yeah.
100%. Melissa, we adore you. You're the best. And thank you so much. We will keep up with you and see all the wonderful reports coming out of, your work with GRA and also with Standby and the Cancer Grant Challenges. So thanks
you.
again.
You guys are my role models, partners in life. I love it.
Thank you.
That concludes today's episode. See you next time.